a little bit about what are some of the barriers that families face? You said you experienced firsthand when you were going through this process.
Absolutely. So even before a child gets to Chicago public schools, there's systems before. And there's so many in the city because we're a large city with many opportunities, but there's also many barriers. So we have language barriers. We have access barriers. Physical, transportation needs. Language barriers are so huge because every practice doesn't speak Cantonese, or, and we assume that it's easy. We have insurance barriers. There's so many things, but one thing that we're working towards is understanding how the impact carries over and minimizing those.
Carrie, we've been talking about trauma and SEL, and today's episode is going to be centered around our students with disabilities. It's something we don't talk about enough, like how are they experiencing early learning, but then how are they also experiencing it when they have trauma? And so glad to have you here today to engage in this conversation. So let me just tell you a little bit about this space. So Circle Time Conversations, we're family here. My people are out in the chat and everywhere. And this is a place where we demystify, right? Things that are not true, and we really get to some place of clarity. So happy to have you here. Why don't we start with, I know you because we work in the same school system. So can you let others know who you are and why you're here today and why you're so passionate about this work?
Absolutely. So again, thank you for having me, Dr. Carrie Comer-Yates. I am currently in my professional role, the Early Childhood Senior Manager for the Office of Students with Disabilities, and I have the opportunity to work with you in the Office of Early Childhood, but also other, work streams in the city of Chicago, advocating for kiddos with disabilities. And so in the work that I do, I support the kiddos to make sure they get the services that they need, the access, the evaluations, but also just the support and making sure that they're in our high quality programs, but they're thriving and not just there. And one of the reasons why I do this work is actually my son. And as a small child, I noticed that he had some developmental delays, and I was also a teacher at the time. And so during this time, I was like, this can't be real. Like, this is my kid. Like, I'm supposed to have it together. But I also encountered the barriers that many families do when navigating the resources. And so that championed me, and every child has now become my CAM, and making sure that they get what they need, but also that they're successful and can thrive and get to every opportunity they're entitled to.
That is so beautiful. And I love how the personal really spilled over into the professional. And so now you're looking at every child as your child.
Absolutely.
I love that. Tell me a little bit about what are some of the barriers that families face? You said you experienced firsthand when you were going through this process.
Absolutely. So even before a child gets to Chicago public schools, there's systems before. And there's so many in the city because we're a large city with many opportunities, but there's also many barriers. So we have language barriers. We have access barriers. Physical, transportation needs. Language barriers are so huge because every practice doesn't speak Cantonese, or, and we assume that it's easy. We have insurance barriers. There's so many things, but one thing that we're working towards is understanding how the impact carries over and minimizing those.
Another question I have for you, or something I want you just to expound on what you said. When you talked about but we're doing better, right? To make sure that we mitigate those barriers and that students are getting access. Talk a little bit about some of the things that we're doing, because again, I have so many families that come up to me that do not have a clue of where to go. What's that first step that families need to take?
Yeah. So the first part is understanding and not assuming that families know what to do. And that has been huge, and making sure that things are accessible. So right now we have 3 streams to come into the district for support. So the first is we have assessment teams at libraries all over the city. every day, 5 days a week. And we're working to make sure that if a kiddo, his grandma has them, it's available for them to walk into a library to get an assessment. And if the assessment will say flags, this is just the first step to say you need to be evaluated a little further. And it's okay if they need this evaluation because we want kids to be ready and supported. And so once they get this step, they come to the evaluation team and they can, be earmarked for services. The second one, which is something that we've worked so hard on because our biggest population is early intervention. And early intervention has what we call CFCs across the city.
What's CFCs?
Child Family Connections.
Okay.
And so we've partnered with all of them and we do a monthly transition meeting with the staff members, with parents, and this just outlines what to expect. This is also a great way to connect with the district, to have people like myself, the assessment team there to answer questions. If there's a child that was missed, let's say a provider, resigned or left, we can still get those kiddos in. And so we've done a great job with traction in that. The last method is just the children who come from our community-based organizations. We have a great partnership with them where we actively seek the referrals for the children who may be sitting there. And then if they're eligible for services, they can do what we call dual enrollment. So they don't lose the wraparound care. But if they're eligible for special education, they can get their support and keep what we call like the social support or the support from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. because many families are working and they need that. So we work diligently and are working to continue to improve these systems, but also ensure the kiddos get what they need.
That's so important. And I know, especially the piece around community-based organizations, I know as a working mother, I needed that extended day. And even though my child may have a disability, I wouldn't have wanted to lose that opportunity to have that additional time, but also would have wanted them to get the supports and the wraparound services that they need. That was great information, by the way. And I'm so excited to hear that the district has these different pathways and also excited to hear about the partnership with community-based organizations. Can you talk a little bit? I do want to back up and talk a little bit about students who come with intersectionality. And how does that show up in these spaces?
And that is something that we minimize and we need to work a little harder on calling out because we have kiddos who show up with different abilities, different races, different classes. And that's huge because, and especially with a child with a disability showing up with these things, they all bring different elements to a space. And if we put a child in a different space with people who don't recognize or don't understand that this difference is causing a problem, then we have this behavior that escalates and is misunderstanding. And so the intersectionality just means that we as the adults need to go back to somewhat like the anti-bias, curriculums and just approaches so that we're taking the step to understand every single child that shows up in front of us.
Yeah. And I think when we spoke, on the last episode, we talked a little bit about the impact that community has and the role that community plays on trauma. It's the same way, right?
Absolutely.
So we really need to start thinking deeply to unpack what's really showing up for children and to identify what are the right supports and strategies and resources that may be helpful, not only to them, but to the family as a whole.
Absolutely. Because one thing that I like to always remember when we're working with our children is that their families are the first advocate and know them best. And so we need to look to them as their experts and to understand what's going on before we label something as a misbehavior when it could just be a misunderstanding.
I love it. And I love that, we're thinking about that already and thinking about how we can get that on the minds of our teachers and of our families as well.
Absolutely. A little girl in the classroom who Ella was very, very spirited. And
that's code for like busy.
Yeah. Very spirited. And
every day you used to be a teacher.
Yeah. Used to destroy the dramatic play every single day. And I just remember the frustration, and it could have just been me just giving up. Like, she gonna do it today. I don't care. And I just watched her do it and didn't interrupt her, watched her pull everything out while holding a baby in her arm. And I just asked her, I said, Ella, what are you doing? And she said, I need a bed for my baby. And so she took the baby, because now the drawer, the shelf was clear. She put the baby on there, took the cover, put it on there, walked away, made her food, and was fine. And then when she finished, she cleaned up. But I realized in that moment, I had never given her the chance to do that. And I was always, because, again, she was a spirited child who was defiant sometimes, and it just was genuine defiance. It was who she was. But in that moment, I remember seeing her differently, because she had a process, but she didn't have the language to tell me, please don't, make me stop, because I want something from it. Because in her brain, she wanted to go straight to moving it so she could put her baby down. And so I think like those are moments that as educators and parents that you can do to understand behavior, because not all kids have language to say, I want a bed for my baby.
Yeah, no, I love that. And what it's teaching too is, so much, I think back in the day, it used to be, a child is spoke to, right? And now we know better. Again, I keep saying, when you know better, you do better. But we are really seeking to understand children, and they're so multifaceted, and they have so much to bring. And I love how the district is moving to bring student voice and agency into everything that we're doing. It's so critical, just like what you mentioned about, we'll call her Ella, the child that you were referencing in your class. Like, it's so key to the work that we're doing now, and I'm really excited to be a part of it.
Same.
So Carrie, you mentioned something that you noticed and an aha moment that you had, and so I just want to push you a little bit to think about, how can we make that a practice? So you step back and you said, I didn't give her this opportunity. And I know you're in and out of schools and in and out of classrooms. What can we continue to do or think about to make some policy shifts to ensure that those types of experiences and opportunities are provided to all children, whether they're in our pre-K rooms all the way up?
So one thing that I am just so happy that has happened at least the last 2 years, but more specifically this last year, is our departments, the work that we've done to ensure that, one, curriculum is aligned, and that all children are getting what they need. And we've moved away from, these are your kids, these are my kids, these are gen ed, these are special ed, these are our children. And so, I'm seeing the work with our specialists. And just this week alone, there was a meeting with, of course, the managers, but for the specialists in both departments to align this work where when there's an issue, we're looking to the immediate solve. We're not calling somebody. We're equipping the people that are on the ground to do the work. It's not we need to call the disability department to support this child. We may need them in maybe later on as the expert, but right now, this is what we have and this is what we can do. And if we can't handle it, then we'll call in, somebody else. But it's taking that ownership for all the children is a great first step, because we're looking at, how do we align this? What does the curriculum look like? We don't need 3, 4, and 5 curriculums. We can modify this one that we have to make sure that every child in this class gets what they need.
I love that. And I love the shared ownership, because I think it does start there, right? Because the kids and the teachers and the administrators at the building, they see you right there, right now. And, to have to go to say, oh, well, let me go call this person, or let me now put you in touch. No. You have the connections, you have the relationships, You have the, knowledge of what's happening across offices. Let's do what we can right now for schools and families. Absolutely. And then bring in who we need to at a later date to supplement. But let's start to problem solve together now instead of pushing things off another day, week, or month.
Absolutely. And I also think that allows us to be more genuine and more involved, because now we're getting the positives. We're not putting out fires. And when you put out fires, you're only reacting. And it's been good for us. And when I say us, I mean us as a district, and as, community servants, because that's what we are. And it's also empowering our families to speak up. And they're not afraid to speak up. We're not the big guys that are unapproachable. I know people in families who have my direct email, my phone number, and it gets a little overwhelming, but it's worth it at the end of the day. I know you have these same problems.
Yes. I'm always like, call me. Let me see how I can help you. I want to be a help.
But it's a great feeling to know that families are being served correctly and they have access. Some people just want to be heard, and it's simple problems that we can fix.
All right, Carrie. We're almost to my favorite part in the podcast where we play a game. Did you play Red Light, Green Light as a child?
I did.
That's my favorite game. And so we're going to play that. But before we do, I cannot not talk to you about this because I know you probably have some good information for us. Students with disabilities are at risk most times to have high trauma. So what can we do to prevent that? So I know we talked a little bit earlier about one pathway in the district is early intervention, but are there some other things that families can do to get a head start?
Mm-hmm. So yes, they are sadly at a higher risk because our children with disabilities, either sometimes they're medically fragile, they don't have the language to both express or receive, information that's happening around them, and it causes them to be vulnerable. And so one of the things that families can do is advocate. When you notice there's something, potentially going on with your child, or that you think, because we have instincts as caregivers that, maybe something isn't developing as fast, then, go to your doctor. Referrals are, free. Early intervention is free. Chicago Public Schools is free. So none of these things cost. So, that's one thing I want to put out is that this is a free resource to you all the time. But most importantly, when we think about our children, equipping them as much as possible with the right language. Sometimes when children develop, stop and no are the first, words. And as parents, we hate it, but those are protective words. Yeah. And so encouraging children, when you don't like something, you say stop, you say no, or finding a safe outlet to let them know if they don't have the language when something is wrong. And something is wrong is not always like the big things that we think about. It could be, I don't like this food because it makes my stomach hurt. And so if a child says, no, I don't like that, that's okay. So just becoming comfortable with encouraging your child to speak up for themselves in their own way. Of course, the children who don't have language, we want to give them like the social stories, or like we have visual boards with things like I don't like, I want, I need. And RCAD, which is one of the resources that we use in the district, Resource Centers for Autism and Developmental Delays, they provide free books for families to come in and create. So, it's using these type of things to empower children and to just be safe. The biggest thing that families can do for their children is be the safe space as much as possible.
I love that. And I love the fact of recognizing that those words are safety words. I think that's something that needs to be echoed a little bit louder for families. And I always say to families to trust your gut, trust your instincts, let that drive you. That's so critically important. That's something that we also too overlook sometimes. And I love that you mentioned that there are free resources in the district. So as the lead education agency for the city, we're responsible,
Yes, we
right,
are.
for providing the supports and resources for our students with disabilities. And I think families need to know that. And I love that you said it is free 99 because everybody loves free 99
all the time.
Can't get a better price. And you know, folks in the district are certified and trained. And so there's a lot of opportunity to ensure that students get the right resources and supports that they need from Office of Students with Disabilities.
Yeah, in both of our departments, what I love is that we have personnel assigned to families. And so just making sure that we let families know that this is available for questions, for safety, for food, for clothing, the basics, you know, that we need for our kids to be academically successful.
All right. So, Carrie, this, again, I already told you this is my favorite game, but it is a place for us and it's an opportunity for us to dispel any myths that may be out there, right? We want to help our families. Like, this is my family. This is my village. We come to the circle. It's a safe space. And so I want them when they come here to get the right information. And so what I'm going to do is ask you some questions and you're going to use these paddles to answer. So if the answer is correct, obviously you want to put up the green because green is go. If it's maybe correct or incorrect, but it needs some explanation, you want to kind of put up the yellow. If it's incorrect, you definitely want to throw up the red and paddle, and then we can talk about why or why not. If a child has an IEP, is that enough to support their trauma too?
That is yellow.
Okay, I put no. Okay,
because the IEP, the individual education plan, is individualized. Yeah. So there are children who they're going to have that built into it already. However, children develop and they change. So in 3 months, this may not be enough. But for some children, it is enough. So, you know, the good thing about the IEP and the reason why I say yellow is because it's fluid. It is not a one-stop shop. This grows and develops with each child because a child who has an IEP develop in September may experience trauma in December. And so the school team has the ability to go through and work this in to make sure that the children are successful.
Yeah, and I put red for that same reason, but schools have to make sure that they're continuing progress monitoring, right? They can't just give this IEP and let that be the end all be all. They have to continue to assess and continue to monitor and progress monitor students and make adjustments as needed. All right. So if a student has a behavior of being violent and very disruptive, isn't it good for them to be removed from the classroom for everyone else's safety? Which paddle? Wait, which one? I don't know. So
that's I'm
saying that's a yellow.
That's definitely a yellow before number again, right? So we have all of our teachers, let me just say this, are safety care trained, okay? In safety care training, one of the protocols, if a child is violent, and I'm talking chair throwing, hurting personnel, hurting themselves, in that moment, yes, it is the appropriate thing to remove the other children for their safety. However, sometimes it can be individual determination of what violent is. If a child is being unnecessarily targeted, right, that is not the right thing because sometimes behavior is signaling a problem or a want. And for some children, if they know that if I act this way, I get to go to the principal's office where there's games, or I get the attention from that principal or whatever the person is that's assigned to me, I won. So, you know, it's behavior is tricky. And that's why it's so important to get to know children, to understand what they need. But to just remove children from childcare and or a preschool classroom because they're not listening, they were a little defiant, no, that isn't appropriate.
I agree. And I think sometimes that is the response that they want, right? Yeah. They want to be out. They want, and so you're kind of giving them what they want. And so what you're doing is something I always tell my daughter I'm not doing. Tyler, I am not rewarding bad behavior.
Yes. And then we do it.
And then we do it. And, oh gosh, I'm still learning. I'm a work in progress with this teenager, but yeah. So I think that's right, and I think it goes back to something we talked about on another episode, which is around we got to understand what they are looking for when they're doing that behavior,
Absolutely.
which means you got to start observing when it happens.
Yep.
Like what's happening before, what's happening during, so that you can start assessing what might trigger this.
And that's actually a term. Like it's called the ABCs that we use in special education. It's the antecedent, the behavior, and the consequent. So what happened before, right? What happened before that behavior? Is it a pattern of happening? The behavior occurs, and now what's the consequence? And that's how we get to children who are able to self-regulate, who are able to, be able to function essentially in a group, in a classroom. And then sometimes that ABC will show an educator what needs to be changed in that room. So,
and I love this. And I think, one key factor that, before we go to the next question, how are you sharing that with families? I get how educators get it. And I just want to ask you to talk a little bit about like that ABC. How is that being shared with families?
Yeah. So the good thing is that the children who have disabilities, even our children who don't, we're required to report in 4 times a year. But when there's a specific, behavior plan or interventions in an IEP for this, then we're giving family strategies. But the great thing is that it doesn't have to wait to those 4 points. You can talk to families every day. There's systems that you can send home weekly, daily, but we want parents to do this at home too. So whatever strategies are being used in the classroom, children aren't just, one-offs. They don't know that they're supposed to do it here, but not do it there. So we want them to do it in all settings because that's how you grow. So we're sending things home with families, try this or tell us what happens when you do it at home. And, you can compare so that we can get to a solution that works for, that child.
It goes back to that triad.
Yeah.
That's school.
You have to
family,
work together.
Child. Yeah.
Yeah. We're a unit. We have to be.
So here's another question we got from families is, if a student can behave for one teacher and not the other, that's proof it's not trauma. Why did you say that?
Relationships.
Yep.
Relationships. It is so crucial for educators to understand the children that are in front of them. And children know, like they're so precious, they're so sensitive. They understand, one, who they can get away with things with. So yes, you may see a heightened behavior because maybe that teacher isn't following through on the decisions on what happens when this negative behavior occurs. But then we have other, teachers who are going to hold firm and hold the children accountable, and they're going to be perfect angels in this classroom. Environments are also key because if you have a classroom that is loud, some kids are okay with loud. Many are not. So if you go into an environment where it's setting you off, and it could be the lights, it could be, the music. It could be
how it's arranged.
It could be the smell. Like anything, children are so sensitive. And we have to look at that arrangement, right? I'm glad you said that because if I see a running path, I'm going.
Yes.
So it's all these things that, we have to consider when you're talking about behaviors in one setting versus another.
And I agree with you, relationship. Yeah. I agree with you, environment, but I'm going to throw one other piece in there, and it's structures and systems, right? Yep. Some teachers may have systems and structures that help students know exactly what they're supposed to do and when they're supposed to do it and how they're supposed to do it. And it may not look and feel the same way in another classroom.
Yeah. And we all thrive on routines. So it's, that's very disruptive to a child who is already struggling with self-regulation. And then that's not there. So that only makes it, a little more challenging for the day-to-day environment.
Okay. My last question, sensory friendly strategies are effective for students on a spectrum, and not so much for students who are experiencing trauma.
That's definitely a red.
Tell me why.
When you have children who have experienced trauma, we know that there are some dysregulations happening. And this trauma effect can be temporary, and we want it to be temporary, but we need to do things to make sure that it's temporary. So, yes, giving children what they need during that time, and if it's sensory related, that's what you do. Yes, we know sensory strategies for children on the autism spectrum are effective, but that doesn't mean it can be effective for both. So yes, when we have weighted blankets now, we have fidget spinners, we have
different seating,
we have
high,
low, flexible. Mm-hmm. We have brushes available. We have vests. We have calming corners in every classroom, at least in the Chicago Public Schools. Shout out to Chicago Public Schools. We have calming corners. So that's a strategy in itself, and that's already something that's built in.
And that's for all kids.
That's for all kids.
Not just kids with sensory issues.
And, I also think that it also goes back to just individualizing what education is when a child walks through your door. Because if it's a day, we have families that look like anything you can imagine. We have those families in our district and every type of situation. I always think about children who may have changed homes over the weekend, or let's say a foster family, they had a visit with the mom or dad that weekend, and now they're dysregulated a little bit. Or, I was with dad on Sunday, but now I'm with mom on Monday and she doesn't have my book bag. That can throw you off. And so that is a day that maybe I'm going to need to go sit in the calming corner, or I'm going to need a blanket, or maybe I'm going to need my teacher to read me a book on how to manage my feelings. And
I'm so glad you said that.
Yeah, we have to get back to the essence of figuring out the child.
I'm so glad you said, because I remember distinctly when you said that, it just popped up in my head. Like, I remember when I was teaching in Virginia and I had a little boy who had some challenging behaviors, and noticed that there started to be a pattern of when it happened. And right when you said that, it triggered for me. It always happened when he was at the other parent's house. And back then we did home visits.
Yeah.
Back then we did home visits. And so we went into the, we went into the home and we were able to see the difference in the two environments. And then what we started to do in the classroom is we started tracking to say, okay, this is the week he's with X, and this is the week he's with Y. And so we know Y sets him off. Mm-hmm. So we started preparing our environment to be a welcoming space for him, because we learned that that was going to be a trigger. And so we knew what we needed to do. And when I tell you, when we started to think about it from that way and set up the right structures and supports, and just the level of care that he needed when he came into the room from being there, drastically changed.
Yeah.
But then it also gave us data to also have the conversation with the parents to say, here's what we noticed, and here's what we put in place here. And then we were able to train dad to put some same systems and structures in the house. And I would have to say, like, we probably helped that baby.
Yeah. Yeah.
We probably helped that baby. But sure.
What I love about early childhood is that there's still the opportunity to connect with families. And not that it's not happening in K to 12, but this is the first experience that families have with our school system specifically. But, it's not yet kindergarten. So, we're still able to handhold a little bit to understand and teach. We handhold and we teach. We're making families comfortable, and we're making the children ready for school. But the most important thing that we can do in this space is continue to work with families and get to know them. Because if we don't take the time to get to know them, then why should they open up to us and let us know that these things are happening? And once we know that, the children are only better off. And so going back to the question about the sensory, we can mitigate those things. Even if it's as simple as they got a tooth pulled, or maybe the tooth came out. That's a funny feeling in your mouth. So, hopefully they won't bite anybody that day, but if they do, we understand. Or why they got their hands in their mouth. So it's all those like little things, but sensory support is available for everybody.
At the end of every episode, we provide parents with homework and a take-home pack. And it's something that they should do or recall or remember. And then it is a call to action or a plan of action for them. So I'm going to call on you in a minute. I'll give you a minute to think, and you can think about, what do you want them to remember from this conversation? And then if there's anything you feel led to tell them to do as a result, feel free. All right, so I'm going to kick it over to you to think about something that you want our families to either recall or do, and then I'll give them homework.
Yeah. So the biggest thing that our families can do is continue to advocate. Advocate. We're here to help. We are partners with you. And so when there are questions, when there are concerns, no matter how big or small, we're here to help you answer them. And if we don't know, we're going to find an answer for you. Also, specifically for the Office of Students with Disabilities, we now have a call center. And so, and this has been really great because parents are getting answers faster. And which is what we love. Like, it's not fair for parents to be in queue or to just not get what they need when it can be simple and simply resolute it. And so call us, let us know what you need. And again, we're here to help you make the best experience for your child.
Do you want to give them the number?
Yes. And so the number for the Office for Students with Disabilities is 773-553-1000.
Great. That's a good resource. And I know that all the other pathways that you talked about in the beginning, they can call that number and get directed to whatever pathway they need to. That's great.
And we're here to help.
Perfect. I think for homework, I want parents to be reflective. I want them to think about what they're asking a child who may be diagnosed with a disability to do. I want them to think about, is that a self-regulation for them, or is that a self-regulation for the student? Because oftentimes it gets a little tricky, right?
Yeah.
Who we're providing the self-regulation for.
Yeah.
And so, Carrie, I just want to thank you so much, Dr. Yates, for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
No problem. And sharing your knowledge and your wisdom and your love for students, particularly those with disabilities, as well as all students. And family, what I need you to do is continue to subscribe, share this podcast. If you have caregivers or families or friends who need additional information on how to support students with disabilities, please call the number Dr. Yates provided and drop some notes in the chat. We'll love to interact with you. Until next time, we'll see you again here in the Circle. Thank you.